to die thereafter, for when the body of an immortal soul has been made, just as the quality of dying can never be recovered by the immortal soul, so it can never be recovered by its body. If the vital body of the first man lost the quality of not dying, it became mortal by the very necessity of dying which it underwent, he says. Because it will be absolutely immortal in the future, now it cannot entirely die. So they believed in this immortality, this eternal, perfect nature that is our actual inherited rootedness. It's a very interesting concept. Boethius, I'm on page 65 now of Boas's work. Boethius taught that man was therefore not created perfect, but created potentially perfect. So you can see a little bit of a difference here in the understanding of the principle of perfection. Man wasn't created perfect according to Boethius, but he was created potentially perfect, a potentiality which was not to be realized because of the fall of Adam. One of the major difficulties which it presented was obviously the problem of man's resemblance to God when originally created. And this is why mankind is not perfect yet. Petrus Diaconus, page 67 in Boas' work. So, we believe Adam to have been made good and without any carnal weakness by God, the Creator of all, and Adam was endowed with great freedom, so that he had it in his own power to do good and to commit evil if he wished. And there was death as well as immortality in his possession of free will, for he was susceptible of both, so that if he kept the commandment, he could become immortal without the experience of death. But he broke the commandment, and hence death occurred. Skipping over to Hildebert, page 80, primitive man thus becomes instinctively temperate and potentially immortal and righteous. Skipping to page 81. Man had to be carried upward with all of his offspring to that highest good which had been prepared for him without the pain of death, just as there are two natures in man, the corporal and the spiritual, so two sorts of good have been prepared for him, the temporal and the eternal. So there's a few quick thoughts from Boas's work, Essays on Primitivism and Related Ideas in the Medieval Ages, that I wanted to share with you. Basically, he's picking and choosing this concept of man's understanding of ourselves and our potential future. It's a very interesting concept here. Now, what I'd like to do is get into the early Christian fathers and see how they compare with what Keith Norman has taught as opposed to what the early fathers taught, as opposed to Boas. It's very instructive to do this. In Tertullian's essay against Marcion, this is in volume 3 of the Ante-Nicene Fathers, page 319. Against Marcion, he says, "The witness and the servant of the Father, uniting in himself man and God, God in mighty deeds, in weak ones man, in order that he may give to man as much as he takes from God. God held converse with man, that man might learn to act as God. God dealt on equal terms with man, that man might be able to deal on equal terms with God. God was found little, that man might become very great." He's talking about Jesus descending into humanity. Now, against the Praxeas, this is way over on page 608. I've just found snippets and bits and pieces of the quotes that Keith Norman found in his subject on Athanasian soteriology. In order that if the Scripture had not been afraid to designate as gods human beings who have become sons of God by faith. He's talking about those who not at the time endure the Lord when showing himself to be the Son of God, because they would not believe him to be the Lord. And so what he asks is, he says, "Call to mind along with them the passage wherein it is written, I have said, Ye are gods, and ye are children of the Most High. And again, God standeth in the congregation of gods, in order that if the Scripture had not been afraid to designate as gods human beings who have become sons of God by faith. We can become sons of God by faith, according to that doctrine in Tertullian. So I thought that was kind of interesting. In the volume from the Discourse on the Resurrection, now this is the let me see if I can get it here. From the Discourse on the Resurrection. This is Methodius. This is the volume 6 of the Ante-Nicene Fathers. Methodius says on page 367 in volume 6, he says, on the Discourse of the Resurrection, it's a pretty long discourse too. Now man is said to be composed of soul and body. He cannot then exist without a body, but with a body, unless there be produced another man besides a man. For all the orders of immortal beings must be preserved by God, and among these is man. For, says the Book of Wisdom, God created man to be immortal, and made him to be an image of his own eternity. The body then perishes not, for man is composed of soul and body. I thought that was extremely interesting. Well worth noting. In the volume 4, a little more of Tertullian and Minucius Felix, in the Octavius of Minucius Felix, I found on page 181, he says, it is this very thing which we cannot seek out and investigate without inquiry into the universe. Since things are so coherent, so linked and associated together, that unless you diligently examine into the nature of divinity, you must be ignorant of that of humanity. Nor can you well perform your social duty unless you know that community of the world which is common to all, especially since in this respect we differ from the wild beasts. We do, too. While they are prone and tending to the earth, and are born to look upon nothing but their food, we whose countenance is erect, whose look is turned toward heaven, as is our converse and reason, whereby we recognize, we feel, and we imitate God. This was a big theme in the early fathers. They loved this idea of imitating God. They talked about it all the time. Origen in De Principis. This is the end of Book 3. This is the summation and conclusion of the end of Book 3 in the Principis. This is page 348 in the same volume, volume 4. This is a very interesting summarization by Origen. We are to suppose in this way, accordingly, that at the consummation and restoration of all things, those who make a gradual advance and who ascend in the scale of improvement will arrive in due measure and order at that land and at that training which is contained in it, where they may be prepared for those better institutions to which no addition can be made. For after his agents and his servants, the Lord, that is Christ, who is King of all after all, will himself assume the kingdom. In other words, after the instruction in the holy virtues, Jesus Christ himself is going to instruct those who are capable of receiving him. Well, that makes sense. And this in respect of his being wisdom. Jesus is actually reigning in them until he has subjected them to the Father, who has subdued all things to himself. In other words, that when they shall have been made capable of receiving God, God may be to them all in all. This is us. Them is us, the humans, the people who accept Christ as the Lord, you see. So then, accordingly, as a necessary consequence, our bodily nature will obtain that highest condition, to which nothing more can be added. Having discussed up to this point the quality of bodily nature, or of spiritual body, he says, we'll leave it up to you, the reader, to determine which is better. The idea of the immortal, deified aspect of body being in God or not. It's a very interesting idea. They took this quite literally. They were